Hello and welcome to Creator, a new series for Creator Resources YouTube channel where me, Stephanie Cooke, will be talking to a wide variety of creators in the industry and discussing all kinds of stuff that we think might be important to you or just interesting to you. Or maybe we'll just have conversations that are interesting to us, and hopefully subsequently you will find those interesting.
We really don't know yet.
We don't know, but we're on this journey and you are here with us, hopefully. My very first guest and guinea pig is the wonderful Lilah Sturges. Lilah, hello.
Stephanie, hi.
Hi.
This is
Fancy
so
meeting you
fun.
here.
I know. What were the odds?
And you look fabulous. You know, we've
Thanks.
said this, but you just do. It's just facts. I'm just going to tell you again.
I just got my hair done.
It's beautiful. For those who aren't familiar with you, I know what you do, but for those just tuning in, would you like to tell us a little bit about your most recent work, Girlhaven, and maybe about some of the other things you work on?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as you well know, I am an Eisner-nominated, Prism Award-winning, New York Times best-selling comic book writer. Also Ignatz nominated. Thanks very much.
Ooh.
So I got that little indie cred.
Things.
I've been writing comics for a very long time, and my latest book is called Girlhaven. It came out in February, and it is a transgender fantasy coming of age story for middle readers. And it's I'm super proud of it, and people seem to like it. And it's illustrated by the wonderful Megan Carter, who we both know and love, and lettered by Joe McGill. And it's a beautiful book. Came out from Oni in February.
That's great. And I can say that it's wonderful, you know, completely without any bias whatsoever to the people I know working on this book. It's fantastic and you should be very proud of it. So congrats.
Thank you.
So I guess just let's jump into this. Let's see what we can cook up. So, you know, where did the idea for Girlhaven come from?
So Girlhaven was an idea that was a very long time cooking, because even before I came out as transgender, I'd sort of had this idea of wanting to do a story kind of like Girlhaven, where the story is this character who's been raised as a boy, who was assigned male at birth, gets transported to this magical fantasy land, but the catch is this fantasy land is only for girls. And so if Ash is a boy, why did Ash get let in? And there's something kind of for, I won't say all trans women, maybe not even most, I don't know, but for some trans women, this sort of fantasy is very compelling because there's this notion of, I wish someone would just tell me if I'm really trans or not. And I imagine that lots of different identities may have this issue as well, like maybe with if you're gay, you know, like just you want someone to tell you, is this really who I am? Because if it is, there's consequences to that, you know, and how do you know for sure, you know, like there's no blood test or anything. And if there was, that would be terrifying. So, but because reality is reality, like if there was magic that could tell you whether or not you're trans, like that would come with its own set of consequences. So the fact that this magic happens seems like everything's working out for Ash in this way. But then there's a reveal about halfway through the book that shows us that things are not as simple as we might have wanted to believe. And Ash ends up more confused than ever and has to, through the power of friendship, primarily through the power of friendship, kind of figure out who she is.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what does your process typically look like for hashing out a story and going from the inception of an idea to the final product?
Sure. I've got it a pretty good process at this point, which means that I should probably like toss that process out now since I've got it like pretty well oiled, you know? Like I think if a process starts to feel too comfortable, then maybe you need to start being a little suspicious of it. But the way it works for me lately is, I have an idea, and usually I have an editor to hash it out with. So I'm lucky in that regard. I have an editor, or I have my agent to kind of go over and kind of feel like, what's the basic idea, And for a graphic novel project like this, we weren't even sure exactly how long it was going to be at first. It was very kind of up in the air. We settled on, I think, 100 pages that ended up being like 160. Which is pretty typical for me. I tend to overwrite, and I'm trying to get better
100
about
pages
that.
is not enough, though. That is like so
100
few
pages is
pages.
such a small book. I know.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I don't know what anyone was thinking with that, but then what I do is I actually make a little spreadsheet, and I have for every little scene that I think will be in the book, I'll have the scene and then the number of pages I think that scene will take up, and then a running total for the total number of pages in the book. And then as it goes down, then at some point I just plug in numbers, everything, things that seem like about right. And hopefully the bottom number will add up to how many pages I'm allowed. Or if they don't, then I can go back and say, hey, I think I might need more pages for this. Because it's never the other way around. It's never like, I thought I needed 200 pages, but as it turns out, I only need 100. No, that never has happened to me in the history of me.
That's interesting. I think we briefly talked about this in text, but
Mhm.
like I always have the estimate of what my publisher wants, but then like I never really have a solid idea of how many pages exactly it'll turn out to be. I just kind of like break everything down into chapters. I figure out like the page count, once I have the idea of chapters, and then figure out
Mm.
roughly how many pages
Mhm.
each chapter needs to be to kind of hit my total. And I aim for something in that
Sure.
range and then hope that it comes together. But like yours sounds so much more put together than my willy-nilly, maybe it works, maybe
Well,
it doesn't.
wait till you hear the next part though, because then, so like for instance, with like the Lumberjanes graphic novels, they had to be exactly 110 pages for whatever reason, right? And so I would make these outlines, and I would do all this work to, going back with like this scene, I guess could lose a page, and maybe this scene needs an extra page. Oh, we might want to do a double page spread here, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of fine tuning until I get that 110 pages. And then I would send that to my editor, and she'd be like, great, this is perfect, let's do it. And I'd be like, okay, great. And then I would throw the outline away and start writing. And so there was something really nice about knowing that there was an outline, but then I wasn't really like, I would glance at it, and be like, okay, well, I was supposed to be on page 30 by this point, and I'm on page 40, and that's probably a problem, but let's keep going and see what happens. It was kind of nice to know where I was supposed to be, I guess. And maybe I don't know
Yeah.
if you've had that experience as well. Like once you get into it, everything is kind of like, maybe a little more slippery.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of just like get like concerned every now and again. I'm like, oh, is this like too far behind? Do I not have enough pages? Double page spread, like, like throwing it all together.
Exactly.
But I mean, sometimes you really feel it and it's like coming together in a really like smooth way. But then yeah, other times it takes a little bit more finessing.
It can take a little finessing, and then sometimes you'll do like what I did with a recent graphic novel project that where I realized as I was about to hit send to my editor, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go through this one more time real quick. Realized that I had written the same page number twice. So
Oh
instead of the X pages that I was supposed to have, I was X plus 1 pages, and everything
no. Oh
was thrown
no.
off. All the left rights were thrown off. So I had to like take an 8-page scene with a lot of action in it and compress it into a 7-page scene in about 15 minutes.
Oh
So
my
it was just
God,
like, okay,
my heart.
do we
Ugh.
need this panel? No. Okay. This
I
panel where
had
this very important thing happens, we'll mention it off panel.
I had that happen with a short story once that I wrote, and like I
Mm-hmm.
only had, I think, 6 pages for it. It was like
Oh
for a backup.
no.
And they were like, you actually wrote too many pages. And I was like, this is my nightmare.
Oh
Like,
no.
it's like, how do you even condense like a story already so ridiculously short
Already short.
even more.
And then I don't know about you, but if I'm doing a short story like that, I always kind of like I always kind of stuff them anyway. I'm always like,
It's
oh,
hard not
this
to.
page will have 7 panels in it. Like, that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I definitely am a big fan of the montage in short
Ooh, yeah.
stories,
I love
and
a montage.
just oh, we're gonna have a 9 page, you know 9 panel page, but I won't put any words. It'll fit, it'll all look nice, but we got to squeeze some exposition in here.
I like that. I like that. I
So
mean, if you got an exposition, so much better to do it with pictures than with words.
yes, that's like my compromise, because like I primarily write like middle grade at this point, with like uh, a recent foray into YA as well. But like with middle grade, the panel count tends to be 5 panels max. Six
Hmm.
panels if you're lucky, but like 5 panels is
You're
really like
pushing
the
it.
sweet spot, because kids have a shorter attention span. You don't want to cram
Hmm.
too much onto the page.
You don't want that page to look like it's going to be too much.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And they tend to be like the smaller format books. You don't have as much kind
Hmm.
of height to them. So, it's really a different process than kind of uh floppies, and just kind of it all is its own monster that you have to kind of figure out and learn. And
It really is. And I know, when I'm writing for middle grade, I definitely have it's a different scripting process. And actually for me it's
yeah,
an easier process. I don't know about you, but when I'm writing for middle grade versus adult, I find it much more natural to write to that age range. And I typically do like a 4 panel page, and
yeah,
I'll do 3 or 4 panels on a page, and I will tell the artist, just like, feel free to split these wherever you want, because I want to give the artist freedom to split panels if they need to.
yeah.
Um, and usually the people that I work with, like Megan, was very good about, like, if she found a place for a reaction shot, she would just drop it in. And yeah, I like to make sure that the artist has that freedom. So I try not to overstuff my
Me too.
scripts.
Yeah. It's a really fun audience to write for. And initially, both like Oh My Gods and Paranorthern, I thought they would be a YA type book, for like a
Hmm.
high school audience. And I really envisioned it for that crowd. And I'm so, so, so glad in retrospect that our editors aged it back and took it to middle grade, because
Hmm.
it's like you said, it's like a more natural fit for my voice. And you can have so much more fun with that
So
audience.
much more fun.
A lot more jokes, a lot more kind of just like, I mean, the stakes can still be high, but they don't have to be as high. And you can kind of put a lot of fun and camp and just
Hmm.
really
You can
silly
just be
things in
silly.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I mean, obviously there's themes and things within your stories, and hopefully what we're writing has value to the kids too. But it's just so much fun to have fun while writing a story, and kind of just feeling like the stakes are a little bit lower for you too, because
Hmm.
kids just are really amused by like fart jokes and like
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like,
Kids like to have fun. It's fun. And yeah, so I feel like there's less pressure, like when I'm doing a Lumberjanes book. It's like, I know that the Lumberjanes are just, by they were designed so brilliantly as characters that all you have to do is like put them in a situation and just let them go, and they just make fun. So all I had to do was just like, get to know the characters. And then, like, this is so sounds so pretentious, but it's like, it really is true with characters this well conceived. You just put them in a situation and let them go, and you just write down what they say. Like, oh,
yeah.
well, obviously Ripley would say this, and then obviously April would say that, and then obviously this, and then you just, boom, there's your story, you're done.
Do you have like a favorite character to write, or that you've written and just like had an absolute blast like playing around with?
um of my own characters, there's a character in Girlhaven called Junebug, who is my favorite personal creation. They, depending on where you meet them, they have different pronouns, but she's kind of based on my friend Dana a little bit. So I kind of know how she talks. And she has like this really great outlook on life. She's very quirky, but she thinks she's very normal. and she thinks it's the world that needs to catch up with her and not the other way around. And I just love that attitude to her.
You actually just mentioned a thing that I wonder is, I use my friends' voices and kind of people I know to kind of base dialogue on. Because like I
Mhm.
want everybody to have their own voice and to sound like a unique person. You don't just want to be you putting
Oh,
dialogue
right.
to the page, right?
Same innocent
Like,
dialogue is one of my big bugaboos.
yeah,
Hmm. Like,
I have so much fun kind of just like thinking up certain friends or certain people I know even and kind of adapting certain characters to how someone would talk. Like Hannah in Paranorthern is very much based on Liz, who we both know.
mhm.
Just like that, oh gosh, wow, everything's rainbows and sunshine, like,
Mhm.
like just happy go lucky and fun. And I'm like, oh, this like, this kind of character reminds me of how Liz would talk. And I'm like, how does Liz talk? So when I was like writing the dialogue, it's like, what parts can I tweak to kind of have Lizisms and,
Mhm.
like she's supposed to be a delightful character. And there's no one in this world that I find more delightful than Liz, who's
Aw,
a ray of sunshine, right?
that's so
Uh,
sweet.
no one watching this will probably know who Liz is, but we both know who this person is. So that's the point. But she's wonderful.
I can verify as a second data point that she is a very delightful person.
She's a very delightful person.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I just like how often do you do that? Like, do you do that for everyone that you kind of write or?
I don't do it with everyone. I think what happens is when I'm doing the character creation, I will think about sort of the dynamics of relationships that I have. And I'll think about like what kind of relationship dynamic do I need in this story, right? And if it maps to a relationship dynamic that I have in the real world, I might think, okay, well, this is kind of like my relationship with Dana. So the way that Dana relates to me is a way that Junebug could relate to Ash, you know? And so I'll sort of like lean into that. And also I find my friend very charming. And so to recreate her voice is very pleasant to do, you know?
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
I love my friend for a reason. So I think that's part of it. And then sometimes it'll just be like, well, I really liked this character in this book when I was growing up, and I want to do something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Or it'll be like, I have this other voice in my head that is, because I have a bunch of different sort of like voices or points of view in my head. I think most people do.
Yeah.
And so some of those points of view are angrier and more strident. And people don't meet those, because I kind of keep that tamped down because I'm a conflict avoider, right? That's
Mm-hmm,
definitely a voice
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
inside my head. And so I can sort of let her out and be a person in a script. I think that's like a very sort of Jungian approach to character development. Um, like Carl Jung talked about how, we have all these archetypes that are sort of living in our head. And you can kind of give a voice to those archetypes and make them into characters, and then they have a life of their own. And if you know what they map to in your brain, then they're never at a loss for words, because they have a very clear point of view.
Yeah, I like that. Um, so we've both actually been talking about this again a little bit behind the scenes, and something that you've done as a fantasy writer, Lilah Sturges. Uh,
Fantasy novels, yes.
yes, sorry, fantasy novelist,
Mhm.
um, is write prose. So
Yes,
can you tell us a little bit maybe about tackling one versus the other? Obviously they're very different mediums, but
they're very
what's been
different.
your experience kind of working on one versus the other?
Oh my gosh, writing prose is so hard. Greg Rucka asked me a little while back to write a prose short story to go in the back of Lazarus. And I thought, this is going to be a walk in the park. I love writing prose. It's going to be so good. I had a story. I wrote it and I turned in the draft. And Greg was like, this is great. Just a few suggestions. It's more than a few suggestions. Greg was like, I basically want to rewrite this entire story in this way, and that will make
No.
it better. And I was like, sir, you are correct. And that is the only reason I'm not flying to where you live and throttling you. But it turns out that Greg Rucka is actually like a really good editor. And so I had to sit down and just like rewrite the thing. And it was hard and I hated it. But like the end result was really good. And so I think kind of my relationship with prose is like that. Like to me, it's very hard work. And I think, someone was telling me that it's like, because like G. Willow Wilson does both. She goes back and forth. And she was telling me that like it's like it's like a muscle, you have to exercise it. And maybe that's true. Maybe I just need to spend more time doing it. But like I'm trying to write this novel, like we were talking about before this. And it's hard. And I think the hardest part is, when I'm writing comics, I think I have a pretty clear idea of what the end result's going to look like on the page, But sometimes when I'm writing prose, I read back what I've written and I'm like, how does this read? Like, is this good or what?
Yeah. It's hard because like, okay, kind of speaking, we both actually have ADHD. We've talked about this again before too. And for me, comics is a medium that allows my ADHD to like, I can write in a really productive way because like I can kind of like I can write in kind of spurts what I want to get down, and it's easy to quickly kind of fill out those things later on, or like write a paragraph and then jump to the next page and then go back and panel it out or whatever. Like it can be a quicker process to kind of just be like, oh, I know what I want to do, and like my brain goes so fast sometimes and I just need to like get it out. But when you're writing prose, that's not really an option because you have so much description and so like if you kind of jump ahead, and I'm sure you could kind of use similar skills, like kind of just like word vomit things and then fill it in later. But for some reason it feels so much more daunting because it's like, when you kind of just blur a paragraph in comics, it's pretty easy to break it up into panels and just make it so that it works for the artist. Whereas if you do that and do 3 sentences, that's meant to be like 3 pages. That's so much more work, right?
It is. It really is. And I feel like with comics, I can sort of like you were saying, like that for me with ADHD, like I can do whatever my brain is comfortable doing at that moment, So if I'm feeling like in a place where I can write dialogue, I can just like, boom, here's 5 pages of dialogue, and then later I can go back and like arrange it into pages and panels if I want. And I don't know about you, I always write panel descriptions last. So I just have to wait until I'm in a place where I'm not feeling super creative. And then I can do panel descriptions because I already know what's going in them. So I don't have to be feeling creative to do that.
Okay.
So it's just like how I feel, I try to leverage that to what I need to be doing, and in comics it's so easy to like split the labor.
Yeah.
And in prose you just can't. It's like I am writing a paragraph right now, whether I like it or not. That's my only job here.
I found it hard because like again, nobody else has the context for this, but I was telling you, like I was trying to kind of do a tribute to some of the things that I loved that were nostalgic growing up. And I think I was trying too hard also to mimic some of those voices. And I was just like putting all this added additional pressure on top of it. And oh my gosh, it's just the worst. So I went and worked on several other comic pitches instead, and I haven't touched it since. So
and that's fine. And you may pull it out of the drawer and read it back and go, hey, this actually isn't bad. That's what I did with my novel. I wrote 5,000 words and I was like, this sucks, I hate it. And I just like dropped it and went and worked on something else. And then I was like, I thought, well, before I just completely give up, it's been a few weeks, it's been like a month. Let me just go back and reread it and see, is there anything salvageable in there? And when I read it back, I was like, hey, this is actually okay. And I sent it to my agent. She's like, this is really good. Keep writing. So I think we're definitely not the best judges of.
Yeah. And it's hard
prose
when we're so used to our writing in like shorter kind of script format, I think too. So it's hard to tell what's good or what isn't, because the description doesn't necessarily matter in comics. It's just kind of about how it all flows and how the direction comes off for the artist and how it all comes together. So
Right. I mean, it's the difference between like writing a, like to me, a comic book script is like a blueprint for a building, right? And
mm,
so, like, I'm not building an actual building, I'm just writing, I'm just making a blueprint. So it feels like less pressure. And like the artist is the one who's got to go through and figure out like what to make the walls out of. And, like
yeah.
they're building the building. I just drew some stuff on paper, like it just seems like such a less pressure filled task.
What what's your process for like character stuff? Like obviously you and I are writers, like we don't really draw, but
Mhm.
do you build Pinterest boards for your artists? Like how do you build the lookbooks for your characters and stuff? Do you do that, or do you just kind of let the
I
artist?
just I just started doing that recently, making lookbooks, because I just never really thought about it. But then I had this pitch that was very visually focused,
Mm,
and so I put together a mood board for it, so I could send it off to an editor and be like, this, see, like this, like take all these things together, and that's this. And it was so useful to try and convey the feel of what I was trying to do.
yeah.
And I'm so used to just relying on words because I'm a very, very verbal person. And I always joke, I'm not a visual person. I don't know why I'm writing comics. But I'm not always the most visual person, but being able to take images from elsewhere and put them side by side and say, if you combine these two things, you're getting real close to the kind of thing that I'm thinking of, you
Yeah,
know.
I've
But what about you? Like when it comes to characters specifically, because I don't really do that with characters though.
yeah, so I've found, because again, I work more in the book market and you kind of are more in the comic market, I guess. But I've found that when I'm pitching solo, and I have pitched with artists before, and obviously
Mhm.
then in those cases we've had character designs and um,
Right.
some mood boards and things like that too. But when I'm pitching solo, I try and be as descriptive of the characters as possible. But I
Yes.
also have found that it's helpful for editors who are looking for body diversity and diversity in general, and how
Mm-hmm.
inclusive is your story, making Pinterest boards that show the general idea of what you envision for the character. And again, like the clothes, the style, the mood boards, that whole thing kind of like ultimately like really helps. And Insha Fitzpatrick, who is my co-writer on Oh My Gods, is like the queen of that. Like she's like, oh, we have a new character, BRB. And then she's gone for like 3 hours and comes back with like Spotify playlists and like full
Oh my
on mood
gosh.
boards. And like she is amazing at making characters come to life. Like she's so good at
I
that.
love that. I think that's something
And
I could improve on.
yeah, it's real. I should show you some of them. Like they're really neat. And she always has this vision in her head. And I just like, I'm like, I, I don't need to be a part of that. You are the character architect. You love that. That's you.
I love
That's your
that.
thing. But I've definitely taken to using some of that mentality because it's just, I've realized so helpful. And Juliana found it so helpful in kind of
Hmm.
creating the characters. And Maria, my agent, has found it helpful when I'm pitching solo in trying to convey what the characters will look like on the
Hmm.
page. So
I
it's
think that's so interesting because I've always come from this place, like there's two kinds of actors, right? Like there's people who like are method and they get into their and they're like on character even when they're like not being filmed, and then there's the people who are like, that's I just go find my mark and say words.
yeah,
And I've always been that kind of latter type creator in terms of writing, where I'm just like, the characters are just pretend ideas. They're just things I made up in my head. They're not real. They don't have, a favorite, running song unless they're running and I need them to have a song, right? But the more I grow as a writer, the more I think, I mean, obviously, yeah, they're not real, but like they need to feel real to you. And
yeah,
that's what we're trying to accomplish is to like make them feel like real people to you as a writer. So when you're writing them, you know where they're going to be coming from,
yeah.
and that's so important. And I realize that more and more, that that's something that I have needed to grow as a writer in.
Yeah, I think when I was kind of before I started writing more long form stuff at cons, I would talk to my artist friends and be like, what do you like in a writer? Like, what do you like in a collaborator?
Hmm.
And that sort of thing. And it's always a mixed bag. Artists are like writers, like we're all different. They all like different things. But, I know how much work it is to be a comic artist, especially. And I try to kind of give them some guidance as much as possible to make their jobs easier. Like, I don't want to just be like, I don't know, whatever you think is like best. I'm like, here's
Hmm.
what I envision. But if you see them differently when you're reading the script, feel free to kind of adjust it,
Sure, sure,
Like,
sure, sure.
I'm trying to be that kind of creator that like doesn't foist all of the world building, the visual world
Hmm.
building on the artist. Because again, there's like so much more other stuff that has to go into it too. So it's, I guess, trying to find a balance where I'm not being a dictator and kind of,
Right.
like
But you
being
are
like, this
giving
is,
them the tools they need.
yeah, yeah. There's
Hmm.
like, I think there's very rarely things like specific things that I'm like, this has to be in the book. Like, for instance, I guess one of the most specific things I think was like with my first YA book that's coming out in a couple of years, Pillow Talk. A lot of the main character, Grace, her insecurities are kind of my insecurities, like being very
Hmm.
tall and like I'm built like Amazonian. Like I played sports all my life. I have a sporty figure. I'm not petite. I'm not small. And for a long
What's
time,
that like?
well, for a really long time, I felt like I needed to hunch over,
Hmm.
like I needed to make myself seem smaller. I needed to be, more compact. And so, like,
Yeah.
a lot of those insecurities went into Grace. And kind of the things that I felt, so I asked our artist to make her like a bigger girl and,
Hmm.
tall and have all of those things. But like, I definitely wanted like both her tallness and how I felt kind of in my younger years to be depicted on the page in that character. So like
Hmm.
there's a really cool a few years ago a photographer did a shoot with Olympic athletes and did photos of like all the athletes in like their underwear to show like the different heights and sizes based
I
on
remember that. Yeah.
that. It's so amazing. And it's also just a really great reference chart for body types, especially like athletic ones. So it's just like, I want her to be like this. Like it was like, being very specific with the body type. And it's like, but everything else is like up in the air.
Sure.
Um,
Which I
so
think is very appropriate. Like this is the story you're trying to tell.
yeah.
These are the visuals that you need control over. That makes perfect sense. I always try to be clear, when I'm writing a script, it's like I will describe the things in detail that are very important for me to see. And right,
Yes.
like if I didn't describe it, then that means I don't care, like I try to express to the artist if it's someone that I haven't worked with before,
Yeah.
like now that I've worked with Megan Carter, say for instance, my scripts will be shorter
Yeah.
because we'll have that visual shorthand. I could just be like, oh, it'll be like in this book, like in this thing. Remember when we did that, I think that's why those relationships are so important to build with artists. And
Yeah.
when you get to work with an artist more than once, you can develop this beautiful relationship.
Yes. I I'm working with someone on a project right now. I can't talk about it yet, which is so hard. But stuff
Nope.
is happening. Uh, but like it's just like one of those great relationships where everything is fun and we get each other and
I love that.
it's, I mean, all projects have their own wonderful moments and I love them each in their own special ways.
My
But this has
babies.
been my babies. uh,
Mm.
but it's been so much fun to kind of just like work with an artist that is like so wholly on your wavelength, and
Yeah.
it's so much fun. So
That really is a beautiful experience. And I thought that that would make a better book. But what's weird is that like it doesn't always. sometimes like some of my best
Don't
work,
jinx me.
no, I'm just saying that
I don't.
like some of my better books have been with artists that I really didn't have a great relationship with, and I'm not sure why. I think it was just like they had like the creative tools that were necessary to express the thing, you
Mm,
know, and
yeah.
like and they got what I was trying to say ultimately on some level. And then I've had like really wonderful relationships with artists where the books came out and kind of, you know, and so it's kind of weird like how that is. But for lately, you know, crossed, like I've been getting really lucky with the artists that I've been working with, and it's so neat being on the books that I've been on where I'm working with, you know, a lot of women that I really respect, and that has been such a pleasure for me, you know, just like being a woman and knowing that there's a certain level of like being on the same wavelength that you're having with your whole team, you know, because you have that connection. That's really
Hmm.
special.
Yeah.
And but it's not um like I don't think it's always necessary, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know,
Yeah.
like it just but it feels good. I know that it feels good.
It does. And when I first came into like the book market, like I'm very familiar with the comics industry, but like I'm not as familiar with the book market and I wasn't really sure how that process would go. I wasn't sure how involved I would be. And I
Hmm.
really, really lucked out on my editor at HMH Kids, Lily, uh, who like my agent was basically like, you are going to have to not be precious because you might not get a say in things. They're just going to do whatever they feel is right for the book. And like, that's that. They might tell you, but like, that's
Hmm.
it. And Lily was just so amazing. And just like, we're going to get a woman artist or a non-binary artist. We're going to get like this and like this. And we're going to have like a nice, like woman team. And like,
Hmm.
and like same with like, oh my God, it's like, oh my God, is entirely women and non-binary creators and people behind the scenes. And like, I just loved that. Like, I loved that there was a conscious effort to kind of make sure that the books were being represented by
Hmm.
people like that we wanted to work with and that mattered to us. And I just, it's a great feeling to put that out into the world, especially kind of given how the industry has been prior and, you know,
Hmm.
creating
I
the
think about
industry
it
we
like,
want.
you know, someone asked like um the oh my gosh, I feel so ridiculous right now because I cannot remember the name of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court justice who just passed away.
Mhm, mhm,
But someone
mhm.
asked her, you know, what is an appropriate number of women on the Supreme Court? And she said, all of them, right? And so the reason behind that is that for such a long time, it was all dudes, right? It was all dudes for a really, 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 really long time. And so, yeah, like an appropriate number is all of them to be women, you know,
Yeah.
for how long? I don't know, like the exact same amount, I don't know. But like, uh, so I think when we talk about like how important it is for us to have like an all female creative team or an all queer creative team or, you know, all marginalized gender creative team,
Yeah.
um, like I think people who, because I have no idea who'll be watching this or listening to it, like, I think people need to understand that it's not like we're trying to exclude cisgender heterosexual men from
Mhm.
creating comics, but it's like these are stories that never got to be told in this way because you couldn't have a book like that. Like, it just, there's no way you could
Yeah.
do it. And so these are stories that need to be told also. And I think there's enough room for all the stories, you
Yeah.
know? And it
I
was very
agree.
interesting because we were talking about, I was asking you and another friend what what was good right now and what should I go get. And so y'all gave me some recommendations and I went to my local comic shop and they didn't have either of the books that I was interested in and they hadn't even ever heard of them, right? They were both,
No.
and they were both like either YA or middle grade graphic novels. I went to a bookstore in town, found both of them. And so I think it's really interesting how like the comic book industry is shaping itself and how
Yeah.
it's kind of, You know, like there's different worlds in
Yeah.
comics now.
And I think though, to a degree, like I think comic shops have been a certain way for a very long time, and it's hard sometimes to step out of that mold when you read the big two only, and like that's just your
Mhm.
world. That's okay. Like if that's your thing, fine. But if you're running like a store and the only growing market right now is really like kids comics and like YA comics, like there has to be a little bit of self-preservation in trying to kind of see that and then want to like bring those things in for your audience. But I guess then that depends on who their shoppers are and whether they really get those questions
Yeah,
that often. So
I don't know. I like, because I feel like this is like, for instance, this is a store I've been going to for years. They're very responsive booksellers and very thoughtful,
yeah,
and like these aren't like, it's not like the comic book guy from The Simpsons, you know,
yeah,
like these aren't guys who only read Marvel and DC. It's a very diverse staff. There's a big, huge LGBTQ wall in the store,
love that.
um, which I love and I'm on. So that feels wonderful, you know, and which makes it sound like I'm on the wall, like it's just me. It's on the
It's
wall.
just you. It's like a little like bookmark that you've had made of yourself and
Yeah.
just like sits there.
But I do think that our industry is growing in ways that no one has anticipated,
Yeah.
and can't we can't fully understand how it's going to go. And I think that like when we talk about comics, and we aren't talking about Raina Telgemeier and Dave Pilkey and these other creators who are selling, you know, in Raina's case, like a million books,
Bananas.
like we are, like we're only having part of the conversation in comics.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's hard because like, I see end of year lists and there's certain sites now. There's certain sites that are just going to be like, it's everything from Image and it's everything from DC and Marvel because this is what comics is to me. And that's fine. That is what if that's what you read, that's fine.
Hmm.
But I see there's like a more concerted effort now to be more inclusive of what the industry is becoming. And the lists are bigger. It's like the top
Hmm.
100 comics of the year because there's no way you can do 10, but they
Hmm.
do a big
Hmm.
staff list and they make an effort to make sure there are middle grade comics on there and YA comics. And I've
Hmm.
I've been seeing digital and web comics being more included in those efforts too. And I think
Hmm.
that is what it's going to take to kind of like in the context of online journalism, not in retailers, kind of like survive and grow is to kind of be more inclusive of what the industry is and how expansive
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
become. Like it's this monster, and there's gajillions of comics on Webtoon and Tapas, and then just on the web in general that aren't even hosted there. Like
Right.
it's wild.
It is wild. And I think about how, like, you know, you have, for prose, you have like the National Book Awards, or you have like Pulitzer that goes to a certain kind of a book, right? And then you've got like, you know, the Edgar Awards, and you've got like the Nebula Awards and the Hugo Awards and whatever. Like they have different awards for different genres because books is such a big,
Yeah.
you know, medium that you really can't hem it in. And so I think that like the notion that we have like the Eisners for comics is
Yeah.
starts to feel like it's not really encompassing everything, you
Yeah.
know, and maybe
And
we need more diversity of like ways to recognize what is good in comics.
yes, I agree. And uh I think that's a growing conversation, and I know people are definitely doing more to point out the big problems with our award system. Uh but we have such a long way to go. I look at like 10 years ago though in
Hmm.
comics versus now, and the strides have just been massive, but at the same time, it feels like everything's moving at a snail's pace, like you just want things to be different. You want things to
Hmm.
be better. You want the industry to be what you see it could be in your head. And it's frustrating when it's not. I
For
think that's just
real.
the world in general, not just comics.
That's so true, but I think you're right in that, like the career that I have right now, I could not have had 10 years ago. There
Mhm.
wasn't a place for me in the kind of books that I write 10 years ago. That's a big
Yeah.
deal.
I remember going to, a convention, and Kelly Sue DeConnick had just gotten on Captain Marvel. And
Hmm.
this was still like, this was what, yeah, not even 10 years ago. Like, and her just being so encouraging to women and just being like, you need to start writing comics because we need women in comics. And there were so few people stepping up and talking about women in comics and making a place for them. And Kelly Sue was one of the first people that I really connected to in that way. And then she'd be like, here's my personal email. You want to write comics? Email me. You want me to look over something? Email me. And like just put herself out there and like made space and made time for people. And then in turn, kind of Gail Simone started speaking up too. And, more
Hmm.
and more, we started to have this conversation. And like it just kind of evolved from there. And I don't know, like before that, though, I don't think I could have ever imagined a world where I had a career in comics as a writer or as a creator. But like Kelly Sue at that time to me was like game changing and
Hmm.
completely altered my perception of,
Like you could see it, like, oh, like I can see this now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and her being taken seriously, and then her career
Hmm.
just turning into what it is now. Like she's unstoppable. She's incredible. And it's wild to me that that was both that long and short ago. Like,
Hmm.
like it's
It's wild to
crazy.
think about, like in like 10 years ago, like you were saying, if you asked me to name five female comic book writers, it would have been difficult. Like you could have done it, but it would have been hard.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I could now I could name like five who are just personal friends of mine, and like there's so many more. It's
Yeah.
magical. And I think also that we have to give credit to a lot of female editors who have been working behind the scenes to make those things possible. Like
Yes.
there have been some really amazing editors who have struggled to get women on these books, to get non-binary people on these books, to get trans men
Mhm.
working, and just to fill in those voids. And
Yeah.
they're the people who came in, started as assistants, put up with a lot of crap, and got to the positions that they where they were finally able to make changes, and now they're making those changes. And I think it's really, really cool.
And I think too, a kind of unsung hero in that regard is actually Spike Trotman too, because like a big thing with
Oh,
like Marvel
oh
and
yeah.
DC is constantly, well, you don't have published work, so like we aren't gonna like
Hmm.
you need that published work thing. And Spike really opened the door for people with anthologies and started to really popularize
Hmm.
anthologies in the comics industry and utilize Kickstarter specifically for comics and really launched that side of things for creators.
She
And
created that whole ecosystem like almost
she did.
single-handed. Like she's an
Yes.
amazing, amazing presence.
Yes. And I think that we see a lot of marginalized genders, marginalized people, like in general, just coming into the industry. And I think as time goes on and as we get to talk to those creators more, I think a lot of them, if you ask them, would say Spike is kind of the catalyst to that in one way or another. Like Spike opened so many doors for people. And I think a lot of people forget to give Spike her due. Yeah.
Well, I won't. I won't
Good.
forget. I'll remember. Especially, I'll have you reminding me. Don't forget about
um,
stuff, and I won't forget.
um, but yeah, so we've been rambling for so long. I don't know how I thought this would only be like 30 minutes when both of us love to talk
It's true.
so much.
So
Um,
much.
so I will wrap this up, but I'll ask you a couple bonus questions in a moment, and those
Ooh,
will be
I like bonus
available.
questions.
Yeah, on Patreon as an exclusive.
Ooh, Patreon.
Yeah,
Exciting.
yeah. It's
These are
how
going to
we
be
keep,
such juicy questions, I would imagine.
well, you can figure it out if you subscribe to Patreon. You can see. Uh, so this has been the first ever creator to creator interview, again, with the beautiful, stunning, talented Lilah Sturges. So wonderful.
Such a
So
pleasure to be on.
it was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, and this is
So
just what I happened to look like. Like didn't prepare for this. As you can attest, I didn't even know
it's
this was going to
true.
be video.
I did, and I turned up like this, but you were like, I just look like this casually.
It's true.
I love it.
I
But
always put on
again,
makeup. I always put on lipstick at 8 p.m.
I did put lipstick on, but I think I'm like washed out from this light a little bit. But I have like the least amount of lighting on in my. I've gone into lizard mode. It's so hot. I just want to like not move. I want to like not have anything happening around me. But yeah, so for anybody who wants to check out what we have going on, you can go to creatorresource.com. That houses all of our articles, tutorials, contracts, templates, etc. If you want to get this bonus interview and other bonus content, you can subscribe to Patreon at patreon.com/creatorresource. Literally all of our usernames everywhere are creator resource. So follow us across branding. Follow us on all of the things, help us keep the lights on, or in this case, mostly off because I'm boiling, but metaphorically speaking, by supporting us there. Again, this has been the lovely Lilah Sturges. Where can people find you?
People can mostly find me. I mean, you can find me at lilahtsturges.com. I do have a web presence, but primarily where you'll find me is on Twitter at Lilah Sturges.
Super verified, super fancy. So yeah, thank you again for joining
big deal
us.
over there. Yeah.
You are a pretty big deal everywhere.
Thanks.
Anyways, thanks again.